In this video, I will share everything that I know about filmmaking and making cinematic videos on the modern iPhones. I say modern because it doesn't really matter which iPhone you have. If you have the 16 Pro Max, awesome. If you have the 15 or 14 or 13, you're still fine. Even 12 is probably alright for most. And the reason I say this is because it's not really about having the best, latest equipment. It's about how you use it. And that's what we're gonna cover today, how to use the iPhone for filmmaking optimally in 2024 and 2025 and beyond. Why should you trust me? Well, I'm a professional. You know that because this is definitely not my third take of this video, because I just recorded two of them completely out of focus. And my equipment's all broken. I have to hold my mic. And what's more trustworthy than a person like that? I don't know. Anyway, let's move on to the actual point. By the way, I'll leave the chapters here so you can skip ahead accordingly. First of all, what actually makes videos look professional? It's a lot to do with lighting, it's a lot to do with the correct exposure, it's a lot to do with post-processing. Settings, sure, they play a part, but people tend to overrate settings. Like there's some sort of a magic thing, as if like having the correct shutter speed magically makes your video look awesome. They're like 10% of the equation, we're gonna cover them, but really it's about all these other things. I forgot to mention camera movements also. Having the correct camera movements and compositions and angles, all more important than camera settings. Okay, let's start with the main camera app. Even though I don't always use the main app, I still occasionally do. It has strengths and it has weaknesses. The pros of using the main camera app is simplicity, and the stabilization is the best out of all the apps that I've tried on the default Apple camera app. The weaknesses are no manual control, no LUT previews for reviewing exposure when you're shooting Apple Log. Let's cover cinematic mode. This is completely overrated because as of now, if you're using the 16 or below, and I'm gonna guess it's gonna stay this way for quite a while, I don't think you should be using cinematic mode. The fake motion blur is obvious and noticeable. It is a giveaway that you're shooting on an iPhone. Frankly, if you look for more than half a second, it just doesn't look that great, even now. So I wouldn't use the cinematic mode, just use the regular modes. Probably the best tool you have available to you is locking the exposure by holding the screen for about a second and then dragging the exposure slider up and down to whatever is appropriate. This is because you don't want to have the exposure change constantly when you're shooting. That's kind of, it doesn't look good. It's kind of unprofessional, and it's more difficult to edit and color grade later. Often what is not mentioned is that you should probably be shooting, especially when you're out at night, you should be shooting on the full screen brightness. So then you can optimally see how much shadows and how much highlights you're showing. Because if you are on like 10% brightness, it can be easy to overexpose things. Now, exposure is kind of difficult on the default app because you have no readings, you just kind of have to eyeball it. I've noticed that the iPhone tends to favor overexposure. Overexposure tends to, first of all, it bumps your ISO high, so it's more noisy than it needs to be. This is especially important at night. And it tends to also blow out the highlights kind of easily, and blown out highlights generally tend to look bad. So generally you want to go minus on the exposure slider. And you want to underexpose your footage, especially during the nighttime. How much do you underexpose? Generally between -1 and -1.7, depending on how much highlights there are and how much you want to retain the highlight detail. The best way to know how much you should underexpose or overexpose the footage for that matter is by shooting a lot and then editing the footage. Editing is especially important because once you edit the footage, you know how much you can change the footage in post, and you know what you can get away with and what you cannot get away with. Like personally, I don't like to blow out highlights, but I also want to balance the shadows so that there's enough detail in those. If you're someone who travels a lot outside of your home country, you might have noticed that occasionally you get flicker when you're shooting lights. Now, all lights tend to flicker at a speed that is not distinguishable to the human eye, but the camera can see it. And without going into too much detail, the easiest way to change is to go in from 24 FPS to 25, or from 50 to 60 FPS, and you can enable the settings from the menu here to switch, because there is no manual or shutter speed control on the default app. Also make sure you have enhanced stabilization and locked white balance enabled while you're at it. Speaking of frame rates, This again depends on what you're shooting, really. For me, 24 is the classic cinematic frame rate that most films would use because it looks pretty similar in terms of the motion blur to the human eye, how it sees things. 30 FPS is sometimes useful if you want to slightly slow down your footage in post, just a little bit, or it is the default frame rate for Instagram Reels, for example, and TikTok. So if you're shooting for those, it's worth considering, although not totally necessary. Then there's 60 FPS or 50 FPS, and for the 16 Pro, there's 120 FPS. 60 FPS is useful only really for slow motion, again, unless you really want that super fluid 60 FPS look for some reason. And 120, honestly, is kind of overkill if you're shooting human activity. If you're shooting something very fast, like sports, maybe there's an argument to be made. And when it comes to slow motion, I wouldn't shoot the built-in slow motion thing. Again, I would shoot higher frame rate and then slow it down in post, whether it's on CapCut or whether it's on DaVinci Resolve or Premiere Pro or whatever. On a random tip, one thing you really want to avoid is activating the macro mode. It completely ruins the quality of whatever you're shooting. You can see the difference here. Moving on, let's talk about camera movements. This is really what separates the total beginners from people with a little bit of experience, because I've noticed that total beginners tend to move their camera around way too much when they're shooting video, when they first get into it. They want to show everything in the frame and kind of frantic, when the best thing you can do as a beginner is to simply keep your frame still. Like if you were a tripod, shoot a little bit, cut the footage, then have the other composition, cut the footage. Kind of think like a photographer, really. And if you do want to add camera movement, I find the best way to add camera movement is by actually keeping the camera still, but then moving your legs. Moving your legs forward is obviously the easiest. You can also pan sideways, and it's very dynamic if you track something at a similar speed as they're going for certain kind of more cinematic tracking shots. Important to notice that you want to walk like you're a ninja, try not to get caught, because every tiny little bit movement, even though the iPhone is excellent at stabilizing footage, every movement is still shaky, so you want to minimize that as much as possible. Now let's talk about ProRes Log, that was introduced in the 15 generation. I don't always shoot it, but it's a great tool to have. The easiest way to explain log is that you're shooting a flat profile that captures more data than the default profile. It is more difficult to shoot, but it's easier to color grade. You get to decide your colors and your sharpening level instead of Apple pre-deciding it for you. I don't always shoot Apple Log because shooting it makes my workflow much longer. It gives me more stuff to do, and I tend to want to use different alternative camera apps to do that, which come with some trade-offs. Now, the positive reasons you might want to use camera apps include manual controls and LUT previews. There's two main apps that I would like to recommend: Blackmagic Camera and Moment. Blackmagic is free and has all the features you need, but can be a little bit laggy, especially if your phone is half full or more than half full in terms of storage. And Moment, which is a smoother app, but has slightly less stabilization and a couple of bugs that are not as good. Despite that, I kind of prefer Moment at the time of recording this video, simply because it doesn't lag like Blackmagic does. Now, when we're talking about camera settings, these are really universal for all kinds of filmmaking. It's no longer about iPhone filmmaking as much as it is just about filmmaking in general. But with the iPhone, your main goal is probably to keep the ISO as low as possible to avoid overgraining. My personal limit currently is about 1600. As the phone gets better, it's bound to go up, but still not an amazing low light performance. Shutter angle is important for avoiding flicker and making your movement look fluid and cinematic. Now, of course, without filters, this is the first thing you have to compromise, because the only way to change your f-spot on the iPhone is to switch the lenses, which have slightly different f-spots. Of course, the old rule of 2 times the frame rate on your shutter speed to maintain the correct shutter angle for fluid movements still applies here. 25 times 2 is 50, 1/50th of a second for 25 FPS. For 60 FPS, it's 120, and 30 FPS is 1/60th of a second. Old stuff. If you're shooting in low light, I would prefer shooting on the main lens. It has the best low light performance, followed by the wide angle, and then trailed by the 5x, or probably longer in the future, zoom lens that is soft as butter and really only usable in proper daylight conditions. Now, the best thing about these apps is LUT support, because on the default app, if you want to shoot ProRes Log, you just have to guess the exposure. You have no histogram, no LUT Preview. The colors get all washed out. It's really difficult to get the exposure just right when shooting with the default app. The solution is using LUT previews. So you put in a LUT that automatically de-logs the footage while you're previewing it while still shooting log. And for an added bonus, you can add in a color grade into the LUT as well. So you can kind of preview what your footage is going to look like once you already color grade it, at least like 70-80% there. I've made my own LUTs for this very purpose, and it's totally transformed the way that I shoot. They are available on my website. Check the link. The biggest downside of using these apps is that you lose a little bit of that awesome Apple stabilization. Now, both these apps do have stabilization, but they don't come without problems. For a moment, the stabilization is simply just not as strong, so you have to really pay a lot of attention to how you walk. For Blackmagic, it tends to slow down the phone even more. So you kind of have to shoot for 3 seconds for no reason, just to make the footage stop lagging, and then you can start shooting. And then you can even monitor it in real time if you're using a stronger stabilization. It's unfortunate. I hope they fix it at some point. So if you prefer super stable footage and you cannot walk steadily, then sometimes using the default app is worth it despite losing all the manual controls. The next chapter is about filmmaking gear, and I'm sure people are not going to agree with this. For me, the point of using an iPhone as a filmmaking tool is that I don't want to use any accessories. It's supposed to be light and small and always with you. Kind of goes against the point. When I want to start kitting out my iPhone, I just look into the corner and look at my Sony FX3 just sitting there, feeling useless. I mean, it's a better camera anyways, and when you start adding a rig, the weight difference becomes negligible. Why would I use an iPhone if I'm rigging my camera? Well, maybe one reason is because then you could use one of those apps to shoot ProRes Log, monitor the footage with a LUT, and also get stable footage by using a gimbal. That is an option, certainly. Phone gimbals are pretty cheap these days. Other thing you do is get filters, like an NT filter or a ProRes filter. Moment sells those. I don't have personal experience, but the brand has a pretty good reputation. I'm sure they're great. Then let's move on to editing. I mainly use 2 apps on the phone regularly. CapCut for editing regular footage that is not log, because you cannot delog on CapCut. I tried emailing them to get them to add the feature, no luck so far. And then Dehancer for a film look. And maybe a less known feature of Dehancer app is you can also delog your footage directly with a built-in profile. So if you put Apple Log footage on Dehancer, it automatically makes it regular footage. And this way you don't have to go onto the computer. App is pretty expensive. I like it, but I also get it for free because I'm an affiliate of Dehancer. So, make your own decisions. I would probably pay for it now that I'm used to it. CapCut, I just use the free version. They keep taking away some features, but so far it's still good enough for color grading and basic cutting and adding sound. Any more than that, I'm probably gonna go on my computer anyways. And my main editor on the computer is DaVinci Resolve. Again, a free software for 80 or 90% of the features. Honestly, pretty incredible that it is free. Now, this software can be pretty intimidating because it is like an industry standard color grading software for Hollywood professionals. And there is a lot of different features, but you can also keep it pretty simple. Honestly, I still don't know most of what goes on in DaVinci Resolve, but I'm able to color grade my footage much better than on Premiere Pro anyways, even with like surface level knowledge. I've shared a video on how I do it. And that's basically all for now. I'm sure I missed something. Leave a comment or I can try to answer some questions if you have them. Hopefully the audio wasn't horrible, and hopefully you learned something.